wonderful. Thank you.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone, or afternoon now. My name is Jeannie Morrison. I am a social worker at the VA here in Chillicothe, Ohio, and I work as what's called a community engagement and partnership coordinator. So that is within the suicide prevention team. And we primarily work with community suicide prevention coalitions. We're like their technical advisor for any and all things VA. We participate in all coalition activities. We do a lot of things like this education. Usually, I'm doing like QPR or some other suicide prevention, but we also will do military culture and things about combat and um, issues that people may face when they're, returning from the service. A little bit about my background. I have a degree from Cleveland State University in social work, a master's. I also have a master's degree in science of management with a healthcare focus. I've been with the VA for 18 years. All of that has been in mental health. I was also an intern at the VA for 2 years in Cleveland before that. So I've been working with veterans for about 20 years. I'm not claiming to be an expert. I don't know everything by all means. I never served in the military myself. So, what I'm sharing with you today are things that I've picked up along my way, things based on research. So, feel free to ask questions. If I don't know the answer, I will definitely get back to you with it. But I really appreciate you all joining me to talk about, what our veterans are facing when they're coming back and what active duty service members have to deal with as well. So let me share my slides. Now, I was trying to put these in the chat before the thing started, and for some reason, it's just not working. So I will make sure to get you guys my slide decks. All right, so when we talk about the military, we need to know a general background of what we're dealing with here. So there are now 6 branches of the service. So there's always been, or as long as we can remember, Army, Navy, Marines, and Air Force and Coast Guard. Recently, Space Force was added as part of the military. It's now a branch of the Air Force, and this is our space exploration, so think NASA. Another way to think about the military is active duty, being in the Guard, being in reserves, or being a veteran. So, active duty military or Guard or reserves are generally the 3 ways people serve. Unfortunately, there is a restriction with the VA in terms of getting services. So, you would have to have 24 consecutive months of time in the military to be eligible for VA services. If you served after, I want to say it's 1980 something. It might even be Vietnam era. If before that, you can have any amount of service with some other caveats. So I mention that to say most of our veterans will come from active duty military. Now, the one caveat to the being eligible based on time in service is if the Guard or reserves were activated for combat or combat mission support. Then that 24 consecutive months kind of isn't as much of an inclusion criteria. So when you're thinking about veterans, we consider anyone who got out of the military to be a veteran, but even veterans themselves within their own community some feel like, well, I didn't serve in combat, so I'm not a real veteran, or I wasn't in for all 4 years, so I'm not a real veteran. But veterans are anyone who served in the military. So one note I like to share with people when you're doing an intake or any sort of work with veterans, instead of asking, are you a veteran, ask, have you ever served in the military? For that very reason, because sometimes, like I said, people that have served don't consider themselves veterans if they didn't do X, Y, and Z. Some common challenges, and we're going to go over several of these, that veterans experience when they are coming out of the service is reconnecting with their family and friends, finding gainful employment, sometimes just obtaining basic necessities, getting services established, whether it's with the VA or a community provider, adjusting to a different culture, a different pace of life, and civilians. Because once you've been in the military for a while, you start thinking a little differently. You see life a little differently. And when we get to the part about challenges they face in school and college, for example, is if you think about it, say someone goes into military at 18, right out of high school, and they're in the service 4, 5, 6, 8 years. They have experienced and done more in that 4 year period than most of their counterparts in a college class will ever even begin to understand. Especially if they've been in combat or they've experienced a traumatic event. And now you're sitting in a college class with people that are close to your age or a few years younger than you, and you just can't relate to them. So joining community can be very difficult. And then finding purpose. Finding purpose, I think, is one of the biggest struggles for veterans. And because when you're in the military, you have the mission, you're supporting the mission, you have purpose, you have a reason, you have something that's important to you that gives you meaning in your life. And for a lot of veterans, when they get out of the service, they really struggle trying to find that in the civilian world. And if we don't have purpose, we often are lost and can have more significant mental health struggles. So, thinking about structural differences in the military, it is very structured. There is a clear organization set up, there's a clear mission, there are marching orders, so to speak, of exactly how you carry out whatever your job is. And so there's a lot of ways to just participate and not have to make a ton of your own decisions. Where in the civilian world, there's significantly less structure. We're in charge of what we do, how we do it, who we socialize with, what parts of our jobs we do, to what extreme. So there's all this ambiguity. And a lot of veterans, especially guys and gals who have been in for a while and went in young, when they come out in their 20s or 30s, it's like, where did all that structure go? Where did that organization and that mission go? And they really miss that part of it. So coming back to the civilian world and trying to find a job is very difficult for a lot of our veterans. So sometimes they'll be able to come back to similar jobs they were doing before they went in the service, especially if they went in a touch later than like right out of high school. But there's always this catch up. There's always this, I need to learn new skills because I only knew the skills related to my job, and that's all I focused on when I was in the service. And now I need to know all of these skills to be able to find gainful employment. And that's not to mention any policy changes for civilians that they may not have paid attention to because it didn't apply when they were in the military, technological advances, social norms changing. And applying for jobs, creating resume is very difficult a lot of times for veterans because they can't translate their military service into civilian world. So an MOS, the way you serve, that's what your job is in the military. If your MOS is, let's say, ordnance, which is dealing with explosives, and you come out of the service and you're trying to get a 9 to 5 office job, how do you translate working with explosives on a daily basis to now being a receptionist or a office worker of some sort, or working in the food industry or whatever? Same thing with like military police. If they don't go into law enforcement, which a lot of them end up doing, it's hard to translate those skills. So we have a whole voc rehab department that can help pull out the subtleties, the nuances, like working with ordnance. If that's your job, then you translate those skills on your resume as works well under pressure. Doesn't panic in a high stress situation, or something like that. You pull out the nuance to make your skills more applicable. But most veterans are going to need help coming up with that because sometimes you just got to get a little creative. For basic necessities, when they're in the service, everything's provided for them pretty much. Food, clothing, housing, and there isn't a whole lot of choice if they get any at all. Sometimes they're told you will live here. This is your chow time. This is when you muster for PT, a physical training like running and such. This is when you show up for your job. This is, everything is lined up for them. In the civilian life, you've got to do all that yourself. There's way more choices, and that often leads to feeling easily overwhelmed. And then you get like overwhelmed paralysis from being overwhelmed, basically, where you just can't do anything. Um, or it can often lead to fears or feelings, excuse me, of worry or cause fear. Because when you're anxious, that's a fear-based response. And then we'll have a lot of veterans who react in a lot of different levels of frustration or anger because that's a more productive emotion than worry or fear. Culturally and pace wise, there's also a big difference between the military and civilians. So in the military, they really focus on camaraderie and being collaborative. You always have your battle buddies back no matter what. You're always working with somebody, even if you're doing what seems like a solitary job. There's built in supports, there's a lot of collaboration. And that camaraderie, too, is where some veterans will really struggle. It's like built-in family of choice almost. Um, and when you get in the civilian world, unless you join an organization or a group of some kind, you're really not going to find that like you do in the service. And that lack of social connection can often lead to isolation and other issues. They have a good chain of command. Now, there is still chain of command in the civilian world. You go to your supervisor, then theirs, etc. You don't just jump the chain, although you can. You do that in the service, there's a pretty serious ramification. The military usually dictates your schedule, whereas you've got to have good time management skills. They're mission oriented, which means you work until the mission is done, whether that's 5 hours or 30 hours at one time. Whereas, like a normal job, you have set hours. Um, if you've ever worked with a veteran or somebody that works with veterans, we use a lot of jargon. We have in the even in the VA, not just in the military, our own language it seems like. And so they've got to relearn a bunch of lingo. And then in the military, everything is very authoritative. You're told what to do, whereas communication in the civilian world oftentimes is more collaborative. And not having that direct, here's exactly what I expect, they often will miss the nuances that we have to deal with as civilians. So overall transition, it's not just a change of their jobs, it's a change in most life domains that can feel pretty drastic. And there's no real set amount of time that readjustment from leaving the military and going into the civilian world should take. It varies person to person. It's based on their military experience as well as what kind of civilian community they're returning to. And where they get in trouble readjusting is oftentimes there are not very realistic expectations of how they should be doing, what they should be doing, and patience is not a virtue that a lot of them possess. I can identify with that wholeheartedly. But being patient, allowing yourself time to adjust, and allowing yourself time to figure out how these changes are going to work for you is not easy for anybody, but especially our military who is constantly on like a timetable for everything. Everything has an amount of time for it. When we're talking about veterans that return to school or college, I already mentioned they've had life experiences that their peers can't even begin to imagine. However, there are ways that veterans can transition smoothly into student life. So if the school, which most of them do now, has like a veteran rep or veteran liaison or a veteran group of some kind, um, encourage them to join that. A lot of times, colleges and universities will also have like social groups that can cater to veterans or are specifically for people who've been in the military. So, encouraging them to find those kinds of activities and using tools that the school provides and not being ashamed to use them, like tutors or any like asking for extra time to take exams or going to your professor and asking for help on an assignment because you're stuck. Like, pride can be a very big deterrent for people, veterans returning to school and using all the tools at their disposal. Some things they need to really keep in mind to be successful would be only start with a few courses. Allow yourself, again, that patience and time to adjust. Um, Reach out to other veterans. Um, there are a lot more veterans in colleges and universities than people realize. And so seek out those who are like minded. It really helps with the adjustment process. Get to know your professors, study with a partner, um, take care of yourself, and use healthy coping. And that kind of goes without saying almost, but having to remind college age folks or our older, more non traditional students, veterans who have served for a while and then maybe go to college initially in their late 20s or early 30s. Good self care is really important. So, one of the biggest barriers I've encountered at the VA, and this even happened, I'll give you a personal example. My stepdad was boots on ground in Vietnam. Doesn't really talk about it, so I don't know a lot about his service, but he served for 4 years in the Army. And he had been with my mom and in my family probably 10, 12 years. And we went on a vacation to Tennessee, and we were in a show in Tennessee, and they said, any veterans in the audience, please stand up. And my stepdad started to stand up, and I looked at him, and I'm like, "What are you doing? Sit down. You're going, you know." And he's like, "No, I'm serving the army." And I'm like, "Really?" It never had come up. So there's a lot of reasons why veterans avoid mental health care. So one of them is like just wanting to avoid issues at all. Like if you're an ostrich and you stick your head in the sand and act like the problem isn't a problem, eventually it's going to go away. I mean, that happens to everybody, but veterans by and large tend to be a little more stubborn and more likely to do that. Some other reasons why they may not pursue, especially mental health care, is they don't want to be prescribed meds at all, especially not meds that are going to have some pretty nasty side effects. If they plan to go back in the service or if they went from active duty to Guard and Reserves, they can still come to the VA from their active duty time. So maybe they're still in the Guard and Reserves and they think that going to mental health is going to somehow harm their military career, or they might be denied security clearances. And I'd like to say that never happens, but unfortunately it has in some cases. And so having a conversation with the veteran of how you document in the record is one way to sort of assuage those worries. Um, Service members, especially veterans, feel like they need to be strong, and having a mental illness is a self perception of being weak or appearing crazy to their peers. And so they also fear admitting they need help. Um, and getting them to that place just to come in for their initial appointment sometimes can take weeks, months, or even years for some veterans. And the VA, I've been here for almost 20 years. The VA is about clear as mud sometimes when they talk about how to get enrolled, how to get an appointment. And now, the last several years, it's how do you get a timely appointment? So we have one, for example, one mental health prescriber in our mental health clinic who, if she puts somebody on meds for, say, depression or anxiety and wants to see them back in 6 weeks to make adjustments, see how they're doing, she's booking out 3 months. And so a lot of veterans are like, well, if there's going to be so much time in between my appointments, what's the point? And yes, we do have care in the community, but a lot of times they want to come to the VA because we specialize in veteran care. And then we're telling you you can't see a mental health provider for 3 months. Why would you bother coming back? So it's things like that that can also be barriers they can't control. So some invisible injuries, and I like to call them invisible injuries because I've talked to many veterans who delayed coming into VA for care because they were injured the way they see injury. Somebody who went through an IED blast and lost a limb, for example, or lost their vision, or was somehow physically injured. Those are the real veterans. If you can't see the injury, it's not a real injury. Within the veteran community is how they feel. But things that they tend to deal with a lot are depression, PTSD, TBIs, substance use, and they are at higher risk for suicide. So I'm sure you've all heard 22 a day number. That used to be the number of veterans that died by suicide every day in the United States. It's now about 17, which is still too many, but at least we're trending in the right direction. But of those 17, only six had ever been seen by the VA within the last year before their death. And of those six, only three were ever seen in mental health, not even up to a year before their death. So we are missing a large group of veterans that die by suicide on a daily basis that either have never been to the VA or it's been more than a year, so they kind of fall off the radar. So that's another reason we do education like this to help folks catch those veterans that are falling through the VA cracks and get them care. I don't care if they get care in the community or care at the VA as long as they're getting the care they need. So, talking about depression, a lot of things that they deal with, survivor's guilt or moral injury is a huge one. So, if they were in, say, a combat situation and lost one of their battle buddies or saw someone mortally injured, um, and they survived, or they swapped a shift with someone, and then when that person went out on the veteran shift or patrol, something happened and they were killed or injured. Survivor's guilt. Moral injury is you were forced to do something that goes against your morals and values. Like for example, in combat, if you have to defend your own life by taking someone else's. In a combat situation, that's much different than like doing it on the streets of Columbus, Ohio. But they can't really always see the difference. So that's a really big one that causes a lot of depression symptoms. And when they do experience depression, there's a lot of sleeping difficulty. This is also tied in a lot of times with PTSD because these PTSD and depression occur together very often. They will not be able to sleep because of their nightmares, or sometimes they may try to sleep away all of their problems and sleep for abnormally long amounts of time in one day. Um, Always look for weight loss or weight gain. And it doesn't have to be a lot at one time. It can be a few pounds here and there. And I know a lot of times that's normal. But if we're talking about a change in appetite because of depression, that has to be addressed. Of course, the decreased interest in pleasurable activities, energy and fatigue. The ability to concentrate or being indecisive is huge in the veteran population that struggle with mental health. So sometimes just being able to give them tips or tricks of how to better keep up with things, like writing a to-do list or keeping a appointments and things or reminders to yourself in your phone or whatever. Like giving them those practical tools, they respond really well to. PTSD can occur when someone's exposed to trauma, but doesn't always. And this group probably knows way more about trauma and PTSD than I do, but just to briefly go over a few things, it's the ability to cope gets overwhelmed by the trauma. So they've experienced, witnessed, or are confronted by something that either does or could threaten death, serious injury, or physical integrity to themselves or others. Like I have tons of veterans, and I'm trigger warning. I've had tons of veterans who never served in combat, but their job was to go clean up after a conflict happened. And not to get too graphic, but they're finding body parts, not bodies, but parts, and have to collect those and get them to the right place. And that can be incredibly traumatic. So don't think of combat as the only way that veterans can get PTSD. We see a lot of veterans who get PTSD from training accidents, where it was on the base and it's not combat and it's in the United States, but there was an accident, someone was killed or seriously injured, and it was either you or you witnessed that or somehow were responsible for that. Huge trauma. But also remember, what may be traumatic to one may not be to another. I've had plenty of veterans who have been in combat situations who initially struggled, but maybe didn't need ongoing treatment for PTSD. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Again, these are just some PTSD symptoms, the re experiencing of the event, having triggers, Hyperarousal avoidance is probably the biggest one and the hardest one to address in mental health treatment, especially it's almost worse when you know you're going to someone that specializes in veterans because they know where to poke and they know when you're covering things up and they know when you're really avoiding and not being fully honest a lot of times because they've worked with veterans to pick up on the patterns of when they're doing that. So that might actually be another barrier to veterans seeking mental health care is where are they going to poke too much? I want help, but I only want to go so far. And then they engage in a lot of protective behaviors like how they sit in public places, avoiding crowds, erratic driving, things like that. Brain injury. So, just as it suggests, it's an injury that causes an impact to the head somehow, but it does not have to be penetrating. A lot of TBIs in the veteran population come from IEDs and RPGs. IEDs are improvised explosive devices, so like that's why a lot of veterans who've been in combat will be really careful driving down streets on trash day because in combat zones, they would hide IEDs in very benign things like piles of trash or just on the side of the road, like behind something where you can't see it, so it was disguised. And then TBIs are also largely uh, caused by rocket propelled grenades or RPGs. Other explosive devices. So what happens is your brain gets sloshed around and smacks the inside of your skull, and it causes physical injury, percussive injury. But don't just stop as a TBI. If you are working with somebody who has had any kind of brain injury in the military, especially percussive injury, ask them about other problems like um, tinnitus, ringing in their ears, respiratory problems, because sometimes with these percussive blasts, they can also get contusions to their lungs, and those take a long time to heal, can cause ongoing and long term respiratory problems. So, checking on those kinds of things, not just the brain injury. Symptoms to look out for TBI frequent headaches, confusion, apathy, and anxiety for sure being lightheaded or dizzy for no like without reason, like it wasn't because you stood up too fast and your blood pressure dropped. You just are dizzy. Um, Having disinhibition, and it's especially bad, like because when the brain comes forward and hits inside your skull, it's messing with that prefrontal cortex, and that's where all of our impulse control and good judgment comes in. So you're going to see a lot of changes in mood and behaviors. A lot of sleep dysregulation, trouble with memory and concentration is a huge one for TBI. Sometimes chronic nausea, problems with vision and hearing, and folks can develop seizure disorders as well. And those can have a big impact on their life. Like if you have a seizure disorder, sometimes you can lose your driver's license, for example. And so think of that loss of independence that someone who's just coming out of the military has had for all of their life or their adult life, and now they're being told, well, you can't do this, and it's a major function of them being able to survive day to day. Some other things you want to look for in the veteran population a lot of issues with anger or violent behavior. Veterans are not violent just because they're veterans. Veterans can have violent outbursts just like civilians, because of their mental health condition or whatever they've got going on and having inadequate coping skills, and so they react in extreme anger or violence. But they aren't innately violent just because they're a veteran. It happens more in the veteran population because of the things they're exposed to that most civilians don't see. Suicide is the most prolific killer of returning veterans. Um, I worked with a vet one time who lost 12 people in his unit while they were in combat overseas. He had been home 3 years and had lost 18 of his unit to suicide. So we have to date lost more veterans to suicide than we have to combat. Um, Frequent nightmares and intrusive thoughts are a really big one, even if they don't have all the other diagnostic criteria for PTSD. And then substance use and abuse. It's self medication. It's I don't want to think about this or feel this, so I'm going to drink or do drugs. I'm in so much physical pain and have developed such a tolerance to pain meds, and or I can't get the pain meds that I need because of my tolerance from the hospital anymore, so I'm going to use drugs or alcohol. It's very understandable how veterans can get stuck in substance use, and it is unfortunately very prevalent amongst their community. Um, you also want to look for any changes in personality, people that go from being pretty social to more withdrawn. Look at job and class attendance. Are they calling off sick a lot? Are they missing a lot of class? Are they missing school assignments? Are they behind on work deadlines? Um, are they not performing as well as they were or could be? Is there a change in their appearance? Are they going from always put together and showering every day to now all of a sudden they don't shower for weeks or several days? They look unkempt. They're more irritable and restless, more impulsive, or their avoidance is more than usual. These are all signs to keep an eye on that a veteran might be approaching a crisis. Now, what do you do? Not much different from the civilian world. Engage them in good conversation. Tell them about your concerns and what led to their concern, that concern that you have. Like point out, here's what I'm seeing, here's why I'm worried. Listen to what they say. Veterans have this innate ability to have a good BS meter. And what I mean by that is they will know in a heartbeat if you are not being genuine, if you are not invested, if you're not paying attention, if you don't care about their answer, if you're just going through the motions. I don't know if they're more prone to do that than civilians, but because I've worked in this population for so long and the civilian world only part time, I do see that difference. When they are approaching mental health crisis, never be afraid to ask the question, are you thinking about killing yourself? You don't want to say, are you thinking about harming yourself or hurting yourself? Because most people want their suicide to be painless. They just want to go to sleep. And so they could be suicidal, and you could ask them, do you want to hurt yourself? And they could be like, no, I don't want to hurt myself. I don't want it to hurt, but they still want to die. If the answer is yes, be aware that you have now become part of their support system, and it is your responsibility to get them to the help they need, even if that's not you, or maybe it is you. But know your resources in the community. The biggest one that you can use is 988, or the 800 number does still work. If they press 1, they are taken to the Veterans Crisis Line. We have 3 call centers throughout the country. They're all staffed by, I believe they're almost all veterans themselves who are the responders for the Veterans Crisis Line. But just like 988, it's 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. But the nice thing is when you get a responder, they're going to have a level of understanding for your situation if you're a veteran and they're a veteran than seeing a non-veteran mental health provider. There are just things and nuances that no matter how long I work with veterans, I may never understand. But another veteran's going to get it without you even having to say anything a lot of times. It's just sort of implied. And so that's another reason that I really encourage veterans to call the crisis line. You don't have to be in full-blown crisis. It could be you just need somebody to talk to. Maybe I'm not in at the moment, or I'm not available, or it's 2 o'clock in the morning or a holiday and I'm not at work. But having that camaraderie kind of automatically built in, encouraging them to use the crisis line before the crisis happens can be extremely helpful. So some resources and support that the VA offers. First, there's the healthcare side of the house. So that's what I do, Veterans Health Administration. So these are the VA hospitals and clinics. There's annual primary care checkups, like just regular preventative care like we do. But at every appointment or every so often through a period of 12 months, they have to go through these screenings. And some of the ones that we do that are particularly important for veterans to catch them before things get any worse are depression, PTSD, substance use, TBI, military sexual trauma, and we screen everyone, men and women, because it happens to both, homeless or risk of homelessness, and then suicide risk. We also offer inpatient and outpatient treatment. So like here at the Chillicothe VA, for example, we have outpatient mental health, We also have inpatient programs like we have a trauma track that does cognitive processing therapy and what's called mass delivery. So they're inpatient for 4 weeks. They do 3 sessions of CPT a week, and then they have groups 3 days a week that are specific for PTSD. Um, it's not like trauma processing, it's more skill building and if you're stuck on your homework assignments, let's work on them together in group kind of thing. We also have a track for substance use that's 3 weeks residential and a 3 week mental health program. We offer a full range of pharmacy services, and then we have a group of folks that specialize in working with women veterans um, because their needs may be a little different or a little more difficult to obtain than males, just by nature of there's more men in the military than women. And so that's a wonderful program that we have that kind of builds in that camaraderie almost because I believe all the people that work in the Women Veterans Health Program are also female, but not necessarily by design or purpose. It just kind of worked out that way, at least our facility. There are also vet centers. So vet centers are not part of the Veterans Health Administration. They are not part of the VA. They are almost like standalone entities. But they offer a broad range of counseling, outreach, and referral services for veterans and their families. The nice thing is, too, is they don't have that same 24 consecutive months of treatment or of service to get care at the Veterans Health Administration, so they can get folks in who may not be eligible for VA care. But they do individual and groups. They specialize in MST. They'll do a lot of marital and family counseling. They can also see the family member of the veteran in conjunction with seeing them either as a couple or seeing them separately. They do act as liaisons with the VA. So our systems aren't connected, like they can't see our notes, we can't see theirs. But our vet center is in Columbus, for example. It's the closest one to Chillicothe. And they often will, with the veteran's permission, communicate with their VA team about here's what we're working on, here's what's going on. But the nice thing is all services at the vet center are free of cost, whereas the VA does have a copay system and are just as confidential, have the same HIPAA laws as we do. Now, the other side of the VA, the Veterans Administration, is the Veterans Benefits Administration. So you've got VA is the umbrella, Veterans Health Administration are the hospitals, Veteran Benefits Administration are all of the think pensions. So non-service, service-connected pension. They also oversee the GI Bill. They offer life insurance, home loan assistance, but also vocational rehab, and they help with employment. Veteran service officers. So every county in the 88 counties in Ohio has a VSO. VSOs are not VA employees, and just like the vet centers, they are not affiliated with the VA or VBA. They are state employees of the Ohio Department of Veteran Services. But they're really great because they help apply for service-connected pensions, and then they'll also help file an appeal. They help them get their stuff together for their CMP exams. They can apply for an upgrade to a discharge. Like, for example, you have to have a general, under honorable, a medical, or an honorable discharge to come to the VA. If you are general, or what is it? Not dishonorably discharged, but other than honorable discharge, sorry. If you're an OTH, you can get emergency mental health care at the VA, but maybe not like your primary care, your pharmacy, and all that other stuff. So they can apply for an upgrade to the person's discharge status, which can then make them eligible for the VA. Some counties, VSOs will also provide financial assistance like grocery cards, gas cards, help with rent. You know, maybe they'll help with rent so the person can use their money to get their car repaired or something like that. Keep electricity from getting cut off. And in some counties, they also will provide travel for appointments to the VA. So if you have an appointment next Thursday and you call the VSO and say, hey, I got this appointment, they may pick you up and take you and bring you back, but you may have to wait a little bit because sometimes they run it as a shuttle. So they'll pick up two or three people from the same area, take them to their appointments, wait for everybody's appointment to be done, and then take everybody home. So if you're going to use the VSO for assistance with getting them to VA appointments, just keep that in mind and kind of warn them ahead of time that might happen. Because sometimes they forget to tell the veteran, and then they're like, it's been 3 hours, my appointment's been done. Why haven't we left yet? Well, you're waiting for Mr. Smith to finish his, kind of thing. All right. I'm sorry I talk really fast. I know I went through a whole lot of information, but I would love to take questions, comments, anything you'd like to add or can think of.
What questions do people have for Jeenee? I think it was a wonderful presentation. We really appreciate you doing that.
Thank you. I love what I do, and I love helping educate those to better help veterans. I just think they're an amazing group of folks.
Absolutely. Are the Veterans Service offices in every county? Did you say?
Every county
Okay.
has one. I'll send you an email because I can't share my slides. I don't know why. But I also have a listing of every VSO in Ohio with their contact information. So I can give that to you to send out to everybody.
That'd be great.
So the provider can call the VSO, but it's better if the veteran contact them directly and then maybe the provider help them with whatever documentation they may need to get whatever services they're asking for.
That sounds great. I know in Jackson County, our church every year at Vacation Bible School, we take up offering. And last year we gave it to our local Veteran Service office. And they really appreciated that to just be able to go toward more services for their veterans. So
That's
yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. I'm going to give people another opportunity to comment or ask a question of Jeenee, and at the same time share my screen for the evaluation. So we do have an evaluation so that you can get your CEUs for this training today. So let's see. You see my screen with a QR code on it. Okay. So if you scan that QR code, you will be given prompts to complete an evaluation, which is, I think, 32 questions long, but you'll be asked to give your licensure number and all of those kind of things. So that is what we will use for CEUs today.
I just tried to do it real quick, and it says the page can't be opened because the server can't be found. Now, that could totally be an error on my phone, but just to let
if
you
you
know.
are okay, so if you are unable to open the form, put your email in the chat and I will send it to you via email. I'll send you the link to that form via email. Yep.
Well, I really appreciate you guys' time and letting me share some information about veterans. You know, if I can ever be of any help, if you have questions about the VA, I'll make sure to put my contact information in the last slide of the PowerPoint. You guys can reach out. If I'm not the right person to help you, I will get you to the right person because sometimes it's about as clear as mud, like I said, of how the system works. So imagine what a veteran faces. So please reach out if I can ever do anything to help.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I see a couple of folks. I'm going to write your names down real quick from the chat where I need to send